Hello everyone, welcome to this meetup today. We have Chris Robison with us today from meTokens. He will talk about bonding curves and how they are applied in the project. I think it's a very particular use case, so it's a very special idea, allowing everyone to mint their own tokens, and that initial token distribution is facilitated via bonding curves. So I'm very excited to see what Christopher has prepared for us today. Please make sure to post your questions and comments in the chat, and we will moderate them and then either stop the talk immediately and answer your question, or just take them all by the end of the presentation in a Q&A session. So without further ado, let me hand over to Christopher. Thank you very much for coming today, and looking forward to your presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christoph. Thanks, Julian. Really excited to be here. I'm pretty sure that token engineering is the only project I've donated to with Gitcoin grants. So yeah, this is an outstanding community. Really honored to be able to present today. So can you guys see the screen okay?
Yes, excellent.
Just one second. I'm actually going to switch the screens. Well, maybe not, that's fine actually. Okay, cool. So this is going to be a presentation on personal token engineering. So it's economic primitives of meTokens. A little bit about the agenda for today. So we're going to take a brief history lesson to talk about the origin of the idea of personal currencies in general. Then we're going to go ahead and talk about personal tokens as sort of like the new updated current evolved form of personal currencies. Then we're going to dive into really the bulk of the presentation, which is discussing what we are calling the automated discount market maker, which is a modified bonding curve. It's like there's different types of AMMs out there. This is our version of an AMM, which hasn't been implemented to date. We've implemented it, but it's the first time this has been done. And then we're going to talk about some of the nitty-gritty details of how to issue your meToken according to the design of this ADMM. So when you're issuing your meToken, what are some of the different parameters that you can play with? And then we're going to discuss what the actual formulas are, and some just brief overview of some code design for how we were able to implement bonding curves in this way. So a bit about me, I founded meTokens. I wrote a white paper back towards like the end of 2019, leading into DevCon Osaka. And so heading into Osaka, I handed out the white paper to a handful of friends in the industry. And it was sort of like at DevCon that it really solidified the idea that like, okay, this is sort of a worthwhile idea to pursue. It took probably maybe 4 or 5 months for us to roll out our first proof of concept. For anybody who is familiar with Raid Guild, meTokens was the first Raid Guild that ever took place. So I got in touch with Ven and Sam and some of the other guys who went on to create Raid Guild later on when they were sort of just ideating on the concept. And so this was the first proof of concept that was released. We called it Stake on Me. It was pretty limited in terms of functionality and things like that. We learned a ton of lessons, but we always, announced it as this was really truly a proof of concept only. Maybe about 9 months later, we received a grant from Metacartel. This was about the time that, personal tokens had taken off in terms of attracting media attention, but they were sort of stalled in terms of economic progress, and some vulnerabilities were discovered in some other personal token protocols. And so in response to some vulnerabilities being found and the Metacartel community already being familiar with our AMM design, they reached out and offered us a grant. It probably took about maybe 3-4 months until we closed our first round of fundraising. So really that grant that we received from Metacartel was extremely critical for us to be able to bridge the gap from going from proof of concept to a properly funded project. So I'm a big believer in offering grants to projects and doing sort of like these low level funding initiatives. They're extremely important. So from the point of raising funds, we completed our audit earlier this year, about end of Q1, beginning of Q2, around the time of ETH Denver. We launched testnet end of Q2, beginning of Q3, and then just before ETH San Francisco, just after ETH Bogota, we released the mainnet version of meTokens. So this is going to be a bit of the history lesson of where personal currency comes from. It was originally called self-issued credit, and the individual who coined this term was an alternative monetary theorist, E.C. Riegel. So some people here might be familiar with E.C. Riegel's work at a high level. His background is he was an alternative monetary theorist, and he lived through the Great Depression, which had a great impact on him. So coming out of the Great Depression, his main conclusion was that unbacked currency was, as he called it, economic sin. So he saw events like an executive order signed by the president of the US for all US citizens to hand over their gold to the federal government. He was completely offended by this, and obviously saw how a single centralized currency that was politically aligned with his government led to a massive economic fallout. And so what's interesting most particularly about E.C. Riegel, for those of you who haven't heard of him, you've definitely heard of something that he created, which was the coined term separation of money and state. So the reason why he came up with this term was because he saw that a centralized, essentially issued currency could be used to benefit those who politically aligned with a government, while in poor economic times, this same instrument was used to exact harm on the population at large. And so it was used as a tool of economic oppression for the masses. So this is very similar to, of course, we're all familiar with separation of church and state, because it allows for potentially even a minority in power that is politically aligned with the government through their religion to massively oppress the masses who are not religiously aligned. So he proposed the term of separation of money and state, which ended up becoming really like a giant calling card for Bitcoin when it first came out, and it's still used to this day in, like, media articles online, stuff like that. So of course, at the time when E.C. Riegel coined the term separation of money and state, he clearly envisioned that there could be non-political money, and that is how we know this term to be used today. What most people don't realize, first, they probably aren't familiar with E.C. Riegel's work more often than not, that he coined this term, but what they really don't know is that the origins of this phrase is not limited to non-political money. The logical conclusion that he took this idea to was actually that non-political money would be the basis for backing people's self-issued credit. So he came up with this idea that individuals would all create their own money. So what this would look like is that money would be backed by labor. Because he felt that unbacked currency was economic sin, he tried to find and think through the process of what is the core raw material that all economic exchange is backed by, and he decided that concluded it was labor. The reason being is all goods that we see in production today, all services that we purchase, are rooted first in an individual or a group of individuals using their labor to create that good or service. And so he figured the most economically sustainable way to design an economy is for all individuals to create their own personal self-issued credit backed by their own labor. So the way that this would work is the value of a person's own currency would be only as good as their ability to redeem that token or that self-issued credit for goods and services. So for example, a fisherman might issue some self-issued credit, and an individual could trade that for a fillet of fish. A baker could issue a token or form of money, and you could swap that for a loaf of bread. If you had a farmer's token, you could trade it for some crops. One of the most important things that helped affirm Riegel's belief that self-issued credit was a viable economic design or economic system was that what made people different than, say, like businesses issuing currencies, which of course we see today with like airline miles or like Dave & Buster's, like game credits, whatever, you can point to a million different examples of this, is that typically businesses fall into a niche category in an economy where if that economy pivots towards a different set of demands, more often than not, those businesses go out of business. They aren't often repurposed for something different, whereas people are very flexible. If a factory shuts down, that factory worker can go take up another vocation. And so a self-issued credit should be able to follow that person through whatever career path they end up taking in their life. My favorite quote from E.C. Regal that I'll leave all of you guys with this as we sort of conclude the background portion of the presentation is, he said, "To issue money is a natural right of all people who are intelligent enough to do so." He has a ton of other outstanding quotes and lines in a very concise series of essays called "The New Approach to Freedom," a series of essays on the separation of money and state. There's a few physical copies of this book still out there, so they're like 25 bucks. It's nothing. So I don't know. It's definitely a collector's item. If you guys want a little piece of background, you can jump on Abe Books and buy that. I would recommend it. It's a really enlightening read and very short as well. So of course, you know, at the time that Regal proposed the idea of self-issued credit, he envisioned that there'd be all these necessary pieces of infrastructure that would need to be implemented for this to happen. He thought like banks could effectively be relayers for what could be this global exchange of people's self-issued credit. But the technology really wasn't there. Today, naturally, we have blockchain. And so we can do this with tokens on chain, and we can use automated market makers to create this type of exchange. So this is really what the premise of meTokens is that it is a personal token protocol. But what differentiates it from any other personal token protocol is when you issue your own personal token, you're not just getting a plain vanilla ERC20 token. What you're actually doing is you issue an ERC20 token, but you also are creating your own automated market maker that goes with this token. And of course, an AMM is useful for price discovery, for supply creation, and also distribution. There's a lot of unique characteristics of our custom AMM and this personal token protocol, but the most important one that really is economically novel here is that your meToken is always worth more to you than it's worth to anyone else. And so we'll continue to unravel what this means and how it looks as we sort of go on with this presentation here. But just to give an idea of like how we can use personal tokens today, similar to how there were vocations, and there still are today at the time that Regal wrote about personal currencies, today we also have you know, career paths people choose, although we're a lot more like fluid and dynamic in terms of how we choose these vocations. But really a person's personal token should be tied to the value of their time, attention, and labor. So these are 3 individuals who have currently issued a personal token with meTokens today. We have Skipper Gems, who does NFT commissions. He just sold his first NFT denominated in the value of his own meToken last week. We have Carter, who does smart contract development. He and I and a couple others, but really Carter was the lead engineer for like writing all the smart contracts for meTokens. He's done audits for Aave, like just a really outstanding smart contract developer. He is currently getting paid in his own meToken to work on other people's projects. We have Nick Mudge, who is an EIP author of 2535, the Diamond Standard. It's somewhat similar to like competing with Open Zeppelin's upgradable contract scheme. He also offers audits, so you can pay him his own meToken a day if you'd like him to audit your smart contracts. But of course, like I said, we don't just have these top level vocations anymore where like someone's not just doing smart contract audits or NFT commissions. We sort of, at any given point when we're online, we're generating value and utility for others. And so something that we're able to do more fluidly now is we can offer utility to individuals in a really streamlined way and capture the value of the utility generation that we're doing on a daily basis. So these are all different Web3 projects that are interoperable with meTokens today. So we just created the first integration with XMTP, so you can token gate or create private events, paid events with any of these protocols. You can do like paid direct messages or token gated messages. So like I have to hold 10 of somebody's meToken in order to send them a message, or at least their inbox will filter according to who holds the most of their personal token. And this is a way to sort of reduce spam. We can do group chats with Collabland, calendar bookings with Meet with Wallet. We have our own version of this product coming out soon called Calendeth. You can do video conferencing like what we're doing today. Everybody would have to say, hold my personal token to join this call. Live streaming with LivePeer, voting with Snapshot, payment streaming with Sablier, subscriptions with Unlock. Skipper Gems just created a white label NFT shop with Niftify. There's a ton of options here. And just like to visualize what this looks like, here's a quick booking event using Calendeth where you can go into somebody's calendar. You can go ahead and fill out what your name, email, the topic of the meeting is. And then here you're token gated. You have to hold so many of their personal token in order to book the event. So you can obviously purchase more tokens from the booking event if you don't have them, and then go ahead and confirm the checkout. The reason why we designed the personal token protocol, so that way the value of your token is worth more to you than everyone else, there's sort of this asymmetric value creation, is because we've seen a lot of personal tokens get abandoned over time. And the main reason why we feel this is the case is because people's personal tokens effectively become a meme coin. When they're worth the same to you as they're worth to everybody else, suddenly you have to do more work and put that work into the system in order to generate value, instead of having that token work for you, which I really think is the point of a lot of token engineering, is like, whatever the goal of that token is, there should be economic design around it to achieve that goal. So in this case, the goal of a personal token should be to always drive value to the individual. And if you wanted to set it and forget it and sort of like walk away for a bit, you're not sort of creating a debt hole where suddenly like you owe this token and token holders all of these obligations, because like you say raised money already. A lot of personal tokens previously were issued as for like ICOs, where somebody got the money up front and then they issued the token, but they had all the money. Why would they honor the token after that? And so that's sort of like the shortcoming of a lot of personal token design, which has been attempted, in recent times, even before blockchain. So there was an individual, Mike Merrill out of Portland, who did the first human IPO back in 2008, even before Bitcoin was out. And that was covered by like TechCrunch and Forbes or Fortune. It made like a huge splash. He now works in the personal token space, interestingly enough. But even when tokens started being built on top of Bitcoin as one of the first use cases, Tatiana Moroz at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, was a musician, and she issued Tatiana Coin. She was the first person to create her own personal token on chain. And this is an experiment that's like continuously been attempted over and over and over. And it sort of seems inevitable that at one point we're going to unlock this potential for people to issue their own money. So how do we achieve this asymmetry in the market? We use the automated discount market maker. So this part is really going to be focused a lot more on the AMM, which can be repurposed outside the realm of just personal tokens. But there always has to be somebody on the other end who's like getting paid. This could be an individual in the case of meTokens. It could also be an organization or a business, such as like a retailer. It could even be a protocol, right? Like for a long time, we had like utility coins that were used like strictly to pay for resources on chain. This might be another way to sort of revisit that use case with this type of token design. So we use a modified bonding curve for this. So I'm sure everyone on the call is familiar with bonding curves. If anyone is not, the way bonding curves work is you go ahead and you deposit collateral into this automated market maker, into this contract. And for every amount of collateral, like let's say it's DAI, for every one DAI that you add as collateral, you mint one new token. And the price at which this token increases is along a predetermined rate. So for example, the first token that you mint by adding one DAI might cost you one DAI. The second token to be minted might cost two DAI, the third, three, fourth, four, so on and so forth. With meTokens, we have an uncapped bonding curve. Some people will cap their bonding curves and say that there's a finite limit of like 1 million tokens or something like that. Ours is completely unbound. Similarly to minting, if you wanted to get collateral out, you go ahead and you burn the token. In this case, it's a meToken. to unlock the underlying collateral. So you might burn one meToken to unlock 100 DAI when you're at the 100th token in supply. For meTokens, our bonding curve has both a ceiling and a floor, which is not too unusual. We do see that in a lot of different systems. So of course, you mint along the buy rate and then you burn and sell along the floor. Pretty straightforward. Something to call out here, obviously, though, is that if there's a bunch of tokens in supply and you decide to start burning some of your tokens that you hold, say, as a stakeholder of somebody else's meToken, you're only unlocking the value underneath that buy rate. So there's still this delta between the floor and the ceiling, between the buy rate and the sell rate, that is not refunded to the seller of the token. Different systems have different ideas for where these funds go. With the automated discount market maker, we use this for something that we call a stability fee. So this delta between the floor and the ceiling, this stability fee, in a sell-off event ends up getting redistributed to everybody who's a remaining token holder. So what this does is it increases the value of everybody's token who is still like a true believer of this individual. They're still holding the token. And so this goes into a separate pool within the bonding curve that can only be unlocked when that token is sent to the issuer. So if the issuer earns their meToken from a stakeholder and the issuer burns their own meToken, they unlock the value of all the additional collateral that's been redistributed through the stability fee. So this is how we get the asymmetry in the market, where suddenly your meToken becomes worth more to you than it's worth to everybody else. Of course, if we simplify this a little bit more and we look at it, there's another obvious delta, which is the difference between the value that your token's worth to you versus everybody else. From a stakeholder's perspective, this really creates an arbitrage opportunity where there's suddenly a discount created in the marketplace. So you can imagine a scenario here where somebody goes ahead and they buy, $100 worth of somebody's meToken from the curve directly, and they can spend it for $150. What this looks like from, say, like a retail perspective is, I would be getting $150 worth of value from somebody, but I'd only be paying $100. It'd be like that good or service is on sale at 33% off. And what you'll notice here is, of course, that the discount in the market increases when the demand for somebody's time, attention, or labor decreases. So when the demand decreases, there's likely some kind of a sell-off event where the supply of somebody's token, which is a proxy to their time, attention, labor, is decreased. When the demand for someone's labor decreases, that's when this discount is introduced. Of course, this is a useful tool or event to have happen, because when there's a discount in the market, that stimulates spending. And this is really where we get the idea of the automated discount market maker from, because as an analog, we see this type of behavior take place in the market all the time. When there's the lull in economic spending, retailers offer discounts or sales to stimulate more spending, just sort of like hold over a business until they get back to better economic times. So you could see this in there's clearance bins in retail stores when they're trying to clear out some of their old inventory that's not getting sold, and they need to make room for new inventory. During the part of the year historically when there's a lull in sales, like Black Friday was created, or at least that's the folklore behind it. But we see these instances of when there's poor economic times, discounts or sales are offered to help stimulate spending. The difference is, in these retail situations, there's entire business teams that are set up to sort of calculate what the price elasticity is for spenders, right? To figure out when they should offer the discounts, at what time, how much the discount should be. Individuals don't have an entire business team to do this, nor does an NFT artist really care about creating figuring out when they should offer sales and stuff like that. They just want to keep producing art typically. So this is why we call it the automated discount market maker, is because it responds to economic incentives to automatically create these discounts in the marketplace to help stimulate spending. And this really introduces us to the flywheel of what we're trying to do here with an automated discount market maker, is that when spending is stimulated, there is some offer for exchange. So somebody comes to whoever, the issuer of a personal token in this case is, and says, hey, I'll give you, X amount of money in exchange for some good or service. When there is an agreed upon exchange that takes place, obviously the issuer gets to earn some income, which is fantastic. Like, this is really the goal of being an economic actor, is that if you're out there offering goods or services, you're hoping that eventually you do get paid for your work. So when you earn income, this typically means you did something good. You demonstrated your utility to the market. So you exchanged your time, attention, labor for some money, and you're able to show to everybody, not just the person that you exchanged with, hey, I am of value. If you do a good enough job of doing this, then what you're really doing is you're creating more demand in the market, where other people will see that you demonstrated utility, and they might believe that over the long term, you're going to be able to demonstrate more utility. You're going to become more productive in the future. You can imagine like a new smart contract auditing studio getting bootstrapped. And after the first couple audits, all of a sudden other people who are going to have their smart contracts audited 6 months from now might look at that auditing studio and say, hey, they're going to become a lot more in demand. Maybe we're headed into the bull market. I want to go ahead and purchase some of their synthetic labor now, so I can spend it with them at a later point in time. If they do that, of course, the supply expands. People go in and they purchase more of that person's token. And of course, the price increases as well. When the price increases, it gives more people in the market economic leverage to go ahead and spend at a higher rate than maybe when they bought in and purchased that token to begin with. And so another offer for exchange might take place, and the goal is to create this self-sustained flywheel where people are able to create this longevity to the value of their productivity, where they're really bringing in a lot of stakeholders who are interested in seeing this person succeed over the long run and interested in working with them and hiring them in exchange for their goods and services. Of course, this doesn't always work perfectly. And so, surely people can continue to demonstrate their own utility, their own value in the marketplace. But if this fails to translate to creating more demand, or for more people to buy into somebody's token and supply collateral to their AMM, then most likely the token supply will contract, the price will decrease. And what this means is a discount is created in the marketplace, where after enough time, surely this discount will look attractive enough for somebody to come through and be stimulated to spend some money with that person, hire them for whatever their good or service skill set might be in the future. And hopefully this kickstarts the flywheel once more, where they have another chance at proving themselves. The high level takeaway of the automated discount market maker is really what this does is, depending on what your economic interest is, there are 3 different price points created out of one token. So there's the rate at which you can spend the token, there's the rate at which you can buy or mint new tokens to increase the supply, and then there's the guaranteed rate that you can always sell. So for low liquidity markets, this is extremely beneficial when you have this one-sided liquidity market, is that even if there's not a lot of other people, economic actors acting as liquidity providers, there's always a place where you can sell out of the market. Of course, in practice, for somebody who would be a significant producer, who would be generating like a high transaction volume in their own personal token, or in their, whatever that token is, it could be like a store token, right? More likely than not, the buy rate and the sell rate kind of collapse into each other and get traded, somewhere in between those two on secondary markets like Uniswap. And only when they need to mint more tokens, when it's cheaper to mint new tokens from the bonding curve, will the token supply expand. And only when there needs to be more liquidity provided to the secondary markets, when somebody sells, will the supply contract and be burned against the bonding curve. So within the scope of the automated discount market maker, there are a few issuance parameters that you can sort of tinker with to customize your automated discount market maker specifically for you. And keep that in mind that every single person, if they want, can choose to have their own issuance parameters. So this makes your personal token even more personal to you. For folks who don't want to take on that responsibility, they can go ahead and carpool with somebody else. Like a group of people can sort of share a single ADMM, the parameters of their ADMM, and have some sort of like governance decision around how that gets upgraded over time. But to jump into the parameters here, what you'll notice is during that redistribution of the stability fee to existing stakeholders, you'll notice this trend line begins to emerge, a clear trend line where, this is really the spend rate. Like it's this predictable rate, similar to how you have a predictable rate of being able to mint new tokens, buy them, and a predictable rate of how you can sell your tokens in the market. There is also a predictable rate at which you can always spend your tokens in the event that there is some sort of a mass sell-off event, like maybe an individual like loses their job, or they're in a country that all of a sudden has like a new embargo put on it, something like, you could imagine like lots of different scenarios. Maybe, yeah, who knows? But the point is that like for a stakeholder who enters the market, they now have some type of reliability to know that if I buy this token, I'm always going to be able to spend it. It's always going to be worth something, even if a bunch of people end up selling it. And I think that's really important because it creates an economic balance between the issuer and the stakeholders, instead of all of the weight being held in favor of only the issuer. I think what this does as a strong benefit is it allows people's personal tokens to scale. If they don't have this, like guaranteed or at least like verifiable rate of spending, it becomes very hard for somebody to quickly like ape into somebody's personal token without already like trusting them or having some sort of personal connection with them, or at least like an introduction through somebody else. Having a guaranteed or verifiable at least rate of spending is very useful for scaling your token across many different jurisdictions with people that you've never met before. To create that verifiable rate of spending, there's different parameters that you can sort of like tinker with to create, like choose how stable you want that verifiable rate of spending to be. And those three parameters that you can tinker with are the fee, so the delta between the floor and the ceiling, the curve shape, so if the curve is linear, exponential, whatever, and then also the type of collateral that you choose to back your meToken by. So you can see here that when there is a bigger fee introduced in the market, you have a far more stable spend rate. In fact, it's so stable that if you held, in the case of the top example, if you held somebody's meToken and there was a mass sell-off event, you would actually only increase the value of your spending. So you would never have less spending power than if when you bought in, except for if the issuer earns their token and they burn it out of the market, then they would burn some of that spending power out of the market, in which case you would be left with less spending power. But as a stakeholder, that would be a good thing because it's demonstrating that the issuer has utility. And of course, that would attract more stakeholders, people who would want to demand their time, attention, or labor. So when the fee is bigger, it's far more stable. When the fee is smaller, it's far less stable. Pretty intuitive. Something else to call out here is that when the fee is bigger, when there's larger delta between the floor and the ceiling, it is far less favorable for speculators. So people who just want to buy into somebody's meToken and then sell out only for profit, they never intend to actually spend their meTokens with the issuer. When the delta between the floor and the ceiling is much smaller, it's far more favorable to speculators. The reason being is because the supply only has to increase a small amount for them to have a guaranteed return on their investment by burning it against the floor. So speculators will like a smaller delta. Spenders are going to like a far larger delta. So depending on who you believe your stakeholders generally are, you might customize your your bonding curve for that audience. You could imagine an influencer wanting a far more like exciting bonding curve or something like that, whereas someone who just like wants to diligently work over the long term and create value is going to want a far more stable economy. You can also modify the shape of your bonding curve. So there's this idea of a reserve weight with bonding curves, which I'll talk about a little bit more later for anyone who's not familiar with the reserve weight, but basically the reserve weight is a proxy. It determines the shape of your curve. So a larger reserve weight will have a more flat curve. So a reserve weight of 50% is going to be linear. A reserve weight of 10 is going to be exponential. And when the reserve weight is larger, the stability rate is more stable. When it's smaller, it's less stable. Again, pretty straightforward. When it's more stable, this is going to be better for spenders. When it's less stable, it's going to be far more exciting for speculators. That price is going to shoot up extremely quickly and people will speculate and buy and burn along that curve all day long, which, you know, might be a good thing for sort of creating this redistribution of funds potentially. So something to think about. You can also modify the collateral of your bonding curve. So of course you can have like very straightforward ERC20s backing your meToken as collateral, like wrapped ETH or DAI, wrapped Bitcoin. But you could also have like boosted vaults that use slightly more exotic collateral types, such as DeFi yielding ERC20s. So like you could use rocket pools, RETH, you could use Yearns, YDAI, Aves, A wrapped BTC, and all of these are earning like extra yield. So this liquidity is not just sitting there doing nothing. You can also be economically efficient with your funds. And you can use this additional yield as additional spending power potentially. You could configure the vault however you want. You could set it up as like a revenue sharing model, potentially so like the yield gets split between the spending pool and then also just passive income for the issuer. That's super flexible. You could also install flash loan compatibility. So like people could flash loan from your vaults, you could passively earn a small amount. So lots of different options here, but these would all contribute to tinkering with how stable you want your spend rate to be. So looking at some of the unique formulas that we added to the automated discount market maker just to make it more accessible for everybody. The first one comes from Slava from Relevant. Slava uses bonding curves over there and wrote like one of the absolute best articles on bonding curves, like for anyone who wants to really get deep into the economics, called Bonding Curves in Depth, Intuition and Parameterization. And this is like insanely resourceful. I recommend it to anyone who's interested in building with bonding curves. But in the article, he points out 3 problems with the Bain-Core formula in particular. The 2 most relevant ones to what we implemented here are pretty much the same. Like you cannot mint when the supply is 0 or when there's 0 collateral in your bonding curve. So the first problem that comes out of that is that when you create your own, in this case, meToken, you have to deploy with an initial balance pooled and token supply, meaning you have to supply liquidity to the market. For some people, this is a barrier to entry. We want personal tokens to be something that anybody can do, like someone right at the start of their career, such as like a recent high school graduate, or somebody who would rather take that initial liquidity, and that could be like an entire day's salary, right? Like that's worth way more to them if they're like, say, in a developing nation, but they have the skills to, say, be productive online or something like that. And so we want to make it so that way, like anybody can create their own meToken. They don't have to be an initial liquidity provider to their token. Other protocols have tried this, and it is a large barrier to entry. We've had people come into our community because they weren't able to get liquidity in their token elsewhere. So this makes a bonding curve far more accessible if we can do this. The other thing is that if the token supply ever does hit 0, so let's say the first economic transaction takes place, like I buy somebody's meToken, that person does something productive, and then I pay them with all their meToken, they burn it to unlock all the collateral. that supply in the first transaction, when it's very low volume, goes straight to zero and the contract breaks. That person's meToken can never be minted again. It's just stuck forever. And that's a huge problem. So the reason why this happens is because with the formula, you have to divide by the balance pooled, which is the amount of collateral in there. So when the supply is zero, the collateral is also zero, and you can't divide by zero. So that's why it breaks. What we did is we wrote the formula, and this does come a little bit from Slava's article, how he kind of figured this could be written, but this is what we did. We introduced two new variables called base X and base Y. Base X and base Y are effectively a proxy for slope. So base X, we just set in our system as a constant of 1, but of course in anyone's system that could be flexible and change. What we really change in our system is only base Y. So what we're really doing here is if base X is set to 1 always when we're setting base Y, what we're really doing is we're saying this is what the price of your first meToken is. So when supply is 1, the price is $1, $10, whatever you want to set that to. So that's really determining the slope. Just as a little bit of an explainer, jumping back to the reserve weight that we were discussing earlier, reserve weight really is like a percentage of the market cap that is held in reserves. So below you can see like when the market cap, if the market cap is 100%, you divide by 2, you have a reserve weight of 50%. You can see now that creates a slope that is linear. Or sorry, a shape of a curve that's linear. But to be very specific, reserve weight is not the same as slope. You need to have that initial like XY reference to be able to initialize a new curve when you don't have the supply and collateral already initialized, because normally supply and collateral are the proxy for determining slope. So anyway, that's what we've done there. The other thing that we implemented here came from an article that was written by Billy Rennekamp. And also it came from a lesson that we learned with our initial proof of concept of Stake on Me. When we launched Stake on Me, we had 3 different predetermined curve types that we allowed people in the community to create their own meToken from. What ended up happening is we saw some people who created their own meToken. You know, after a month or 2 months, they would say, you know, I actually want a different shaped curve. I started with, you know, a linear curve. I want one that's more exponential. People who have exponential curves are getting far more market traction. It seems more exciting. So I'd like to have that, but the contracts weren't written for that to happen. And in fact, nobody had written a bonding curve that could change from one curve to another. This introduces a lot of economic vulnerability when you do this. Because if you go from a linear curve to an exponential curve, you have the same amount of collateral in place, and suddenly you push that price way up, where you might all of a sudden, if you switched, you know, in a single block, you might go from a price of like $10, but with a large amount of collateral backing it, to a price of $100 with even more collateral backing it. It creates this like really economically vulnerable arbitrage in the market, where suddenly everyone has incentive just to like sell out of the market very quickly. And it really just becomes like a gas war at that point. The other behavior that we saw when we didn't have this ability to have dynamic bonding curves that could change is people would not create their own token. They just like wouldn't opt into it. We had one venture capitalist who wanted to create his own meToken, and he couldn't decide which curve to pick in the first place. So he took his analyst and put him on the job to like write a report for him to say, what curve should I write, or what curve should I pick to be the best one for me? And it's like, and he never created a meToken. It's like, okay, so it was paralysis by analysis. And also like very few people have the resources to like hire an analyst, put them on the job to like determine what bonding curve is going to be best for them. So we allowed this flexibility in the market where now you don't have to, it doesn't feel like such an obligation to go ahead and choose your bonding curve. Now you can always pick it later and adjust over time. In Billy's article, he was really the first person, as far as I know, to propose the idea that bonding curves could change their parameter set while in production. And so he said in his article that dynamic curves would allow for the freedom to adjust your price formula dynamically by altering any of the values, any of the parameters that we just previously described. So those parameters again are, in our case, the stabilization fee, the shape of the curve, and the collateral type. For the first two, these are very formulaic. And so we do have a formula right at the top that you can see for how to calculate a time-weighted variable. So a time-weighted stabilization fee, a time-weighted reserve weight for the shape of your curve. This formula is the same for both of them. And the way that this works is you have a current variable, like value set, and then you have a target value set. And you have a start time and an end time for like this update period. This time-weighted formula will go ahead and like slowly change, for example, like the shape of your curve on a block by block basis. And so what this does is it reduces that arbitrage vulnerability from people just going in and instantly selling or buying and entering into a gas war. So you can set this time frame for whatever you want it to be, but like, I think a week is very appropriate, or at least a minimum of say 3 days makes a lot of sense. Having it in 1 day is not, it seems very short, especially for people living in different time zones. We also have a warm-up period, so that way anyone who's your stakeholder is given, say, like a 1 week period before this update takes place. Potentially, you could even set the governance of your issuance strategy to be held in part by your own stakeholders. So that way, like, maybe you have 50% of the vote and your stakeholders have another 50% or whatever. You can set the governance to whatever you want it to be. But that's probably a whole presentation in and of itself of like the game theory behind that. But the point here is like the contracts are written in this way where now this is possible and all the code is open source. So anyone here can go ahead and take a look if they want to implement this type of bonding curve in their own design. Similarly, we have a way for people to update their collateral. This is very flexible depending on like how you want the swap to take place. You could have it as like a single swap on Uniswap, or like you could have some sort of an auction mechanism like reverse Dutch auction. Potentially, it's super flexible, but it's modular, so you could add in your own migration path as you see fit. And of course, like we're supplying some as well. But that's the presentation. So definitely feel free to keep in touch. Here is a link to create your own meToken if you're interested. It's at meTokens.com. You can also follow us at meTokens. If you go to meTokens.com, there's a link to our documentation where you can dive into this a little bit more. There's also a link to our code. It's all open source, all the smart contracts. Here is a list of everyone that helped out with this presentation and all the economic design up until now. If you want to support any of them or support myself, these are our meTokens, which is kind of how I envision a lot of, this sort of like networking taking place. So of course, this is mine at the top. See Bob Robison. Carter wrote all the smart contracts. Jay Frank is our community manager who provides like immense amounts of feedback and outlines for like presentations like these or articles or just like ways of better communicating all this stuff to our community. Skipper Gems, NFT artist, who has been like one of our most radical experimenters in the space. He's done some cool like airdrops of his own NFTs and the earnings from his NFTs to his stakeholders. He creates some artwork for our community as well. Nick Mudge, who created the Diamond Standard, which we do use in our system. It saved us like 12% on gas just by switching our framework. It's really, really powerful for anyone who's not familiar with it. It's worth jumping into. And he also does smart contract audits as well and reviewed our contracts only at a high level just to make sure we were implementing everything correctly. But yeah, at this time, I'll go ahead and open this up for questions if anyone is interested in discussing this new type of automated market maker in depth or version of a bonding curve. So thanks for letting me chat here today, and excited to talk further with anyone who's interested.
Thank you very much, Christopher. Thank you. Before we start the Q&A session, by the way, amazing presentation. Thank you very much for presenting today. So let me maybe kick it off by starting with a question that you mentioned a bit, but didn't really emphasize on. So you said that there is this personal token space. So there are multiple projects handling this this issue, or like trying to provide this type of solution to tokenize time or tokenize efforts of stakeholders in the space. What would you say distinguishes you from your competition? So like, what is the key difference between you and other projects that are trying to provide the same solution here?
For sure. So one solution that's out there, it's a very custodial strategy. It probably is the most popular, I would say, that has been used. What they do is, it's a centralized company. They mint a certain number of tokens. That's a finite supply. And then you as the issuer vest into your tokens, not using a smart contract. It's just they send you a certain amount of tokens. I don't know if it's like once a quarter or once a year or whatever, but I think it's a 3-year vesting schedule. And then they keep, I think it's either 12.5% of your token supply or 10% of your token supply. And that's pretty much it. They give you these tokens, and either you can act as a liquidity provider to put some of the tokens that you just were given plus some ETH or DAI, you can put that, say, onto Uniswap and act as your own LP, or you can apply for a grant from this company for them to act as an LP for you. And I think the starting amount that they typically do is like 50,000 or something like that. But the thing is that they only do this for, like, they don't give it to everybody. You really do have to apply for it and be somewhat of like an influencer to start with. The fact that it's also a very vanilla ERC20 that doesn't have like a verifiable spend rate to it, I think means that it really is a type of token that's only left for influencers to use. Because at the end of the day, influencers can sell not whatever they want to their fans, but more or less it's kind of like the category that it falls into. What they're really looking for in that design is somebody who already has a large market and wants to sell a new product to that market, which is a token which might unlock some things. You can contrast that to meTokens, which is, because the curve can be initialized from 0 and grow with that person throughout their entire career, it's really more accessible and meant for anybody. So like, there doesn't have to be some LP that angels for you to give you permission to do this. You can go ahead and just start it. The youngest person in our community is 7 years old. There's somebody who's part of the DAO House community. He's a father. He created a meToken for his son, and he uses it as like a savings account, more or less, for him, and rewards him every time. Competes in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So every time he wins a competition, he buys some more of his token. And this is sort of like the equivalent of his allowance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you very much for answering this so thoroughly. So basically, you're saying that the solution that you provide is both like the primary market for the token, but also the secondary market, because you can allow people to set it up individually. Everyone knows that it's transparent. Everyone sees like the equations. Everyone sees like what the buy and the spend prices are, and also the sell prices. And then you don't force people to basically mint those tokens behind closed doors, right? Like, so you say like everyone sees the contract and everyone sees what's happening and can follow track with your supply and demand, instead of having a centralized party providing all the liquidity, and then you on your own would take this liquidity and provide it only to a secondary market, as you said, and Uniswap, AMM, or whatever, where those tokens could be exchanged, right? And one thing that you also, like, I don't see happening there as well, is you wouldn't have this delta in the AMM, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And that's incredibly important, because when you don't have that, when the token's not worth more to you, there's actually a very, very low incentive to continue to work for that token. I've talked to some people who have done it that way, and they basically felt like they were creating a debt obligation when they sell those tokens and they earn the money up front. And that's like, on one level, like a very spiritually like depressing state to be in like in debt to other people. With this system, you're not creating debt. In fact, you don't actually earn anything until you create the economic exchange. The personal token in this regard is sort of like this meta market that exists around you that you don't even really have to pay attention to. Like other people are observing how you progress in your career or are becoming more productive, and they're sort of like trading and sort of creating the liquidity that then it's more of like a carrot that you work for, rather than like a ball and chain that you're tied to, really. So I think that's also like one way to distinguish this type of incentive structure.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you very much. But still, the counterparty risk, so to say, like with like is each of your creditors basically has to believe in you, right? Like they have to trust you that you are going to provide the solution that you promise, and you are going to fulfill the work. You're going to improve over time and so on and so on. Because if you by any chance decide not to accept this token anymore for any of your services, then all of your investors or all of your creditors basically lose the value in the token, right?
Sort of, but there really couldn't ever be a scenario where like you would no longer, I mean, you could no longer accept the token, but the thing is like, it's always a proxy for the underlying collateral, right? Like it's a proxy for DAI or it's a proxy for ETH. So when you're earning your own meToken, you're really earning DAI or ETH. So yeah, I mean, I guess you could like, for some reason, just totally be vengeful and say, I'm really never going to accept this. But if you're getting paid any other way, this is the same as that, really. So
but like I'm referring to counterparty risk in a sense that doesn't necessarily have to be with your like on purpose, because you can, for example, have an accident, you can die, right? Like, what's happening then? Like, so I invested in you because I trusted you that I will, acquire your services for the next 2 years, and then suddenly you don't work anymore. So like my money is, or like my tokens, my meTokens of you are not are worthless, right? Is this the case? Like, so
sure,
so the question with the counterparty risk still remains here. But anyway, so like given the fact that you would be the one providing services for a longer period of time, this is a very amazing concept to make sure that you have the incentive structures right. You have the person issuing the token, wanting to grow the economy, wanting to like have more people demanding the services, and making sure that there are also utilities in the tokens or in the services, because the token will rise in value if this is the case, right? So it is a very straightforward way to align incentives across a small economy. Very nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
But let me like just ask some questions from the audience, because like I don't want to monopolize the time. So we had a lot of questions. Let me scroll back to the beginning. So counterparty risk I did ask already. Is there a maximum supply? You said no. So there is not an option even in your system to set this, right?
Right.
I then asked the question about how do you determine parameters of the curves for each use case, but you answered this in the talk. So like you basically can choose the curvature, you can choose the delta, you can choose time frames for particular issuance rates. This is what you can do. But I was wondering about the cell mechanism, because how you described it, it means that in the specification of your system, you seem to have a different cell mechanism of the token depending on who is the seller, right? So if I am the seller, I'm triggering a different cell mechanism because I am taking money from a different pool as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the two different parties. So yeah, there's just in a statement in there that's like, if you're the issuer, you get to sell the token at the rate of the spend rate and unlock all that collateral. If you're anybody else, then you sell at the rate of the floor. If you're selling against the bonding curve, if you're selling on secondary markets like Uniswap, you're probably selling somewhere between the floor and the ceiling.
Exactly. So to make sure that like this counterparty risk that we mentioned before is not applicable here, like in the case of my debt, I would need to make sure that someone else has access to my wallet, so that someone else has access to this mechanism, right? So that they can take over my meToken in case I'm not able to do it anymore, right?
For sure. And this could, you could imagine a scenario like this leaves room for maybe another primitive to be built on top of this that looks something like life insurance policy, and a smart contract wallet could be useful in this case. That becomes set as the owner rather than an externally owned address, like we're used to with MetaMask. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so then the next question was about like, because you can use the contract that you have as a primary market or even as a secondary market, you can sell and buy on it. But why wouldn't I want to, like, if I were a trader of this token, why wouldn't I want to initialize a secondary market, an external secondary market where I could also trade this token, where I could potentially get better rates? So I could sell it for a higher rate than the sell rate provided by the contract.
Oh, I think people will naturally do that because it's totally permissionless to become an LP with like Uniswap. You can just open up a new pool or whatever. So I'm sure people will do that. Yeah, they totally could. And some people might even choose to say like, okay, this person's a very volatile individual, so I'm actually going to buy their me token because I want to LP it on a secondary market like Uniswap and collect a bunch of secondary market fees, like transaction fees, as a way to like, make money.
Yeah, but wouldn't this, omit the possibility of collecting this delta spread into this secondary pool on your bonding curve? Because if the tokens are swapped somewhere else, like you wouldn't create this delta, right?
Yeah, but yeah, sure. We could create like a secondary market that like takes some of those fees and puts it into the delta. But really the delta is there to capture when the token supply expands and then contracts. Like that's like at a macro level, that's the proxy for the demand of your total time, attention, and labor is the supply of your token and also the total market cap. So when that is changing is when it's captured. And because anytime that changes, you have to use the primary market, which is the bonding curve for that. So really the amount that can be traded, there's like a liquidity limit of what can be traded between the floor and the ceiling on secondary markets like Uniswap. But it is true, like while it's trading and sort of like ranging in that area, not expanding or contracting the token supply, no additional fees are being put into the spend rate. But you could fork Uniswap and then put it in there if people wanted to. But yeah, I don't know. That's one solution, but.
No, I'm just wondering because maybe correct me if I'm thinking something wrong here, but if I own your token and then I want to sell it, I wouldn't want to sell it back to the contract. I would much rather want to sell it to someone else who still wants the token but wants to accept the price which is between the buy and sell rate on your curve, right? Because this would be better for me and also would be better for the seller, for the buyer, because we both would benefit from it. So so this is why I'm saying so. What you describe here is only the possibility like that I'm selling back to the contract, so like the supply of the token contracts, right? But if I'm just selling to someone else and there is no change in supply, I would be much better off on a secondary market elsewhere.
Yeah, for sure. And you can imagine like having a front end that's more like CowSwap or 1inch or something like that, like an aggregator that chooses like, okay, is it better to buy along the curve or buy from somebody else who's selling secondarily?
Cool. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. We have another question. Trying to understand still how this translates into a real life human example. Discounts for products or massive products are straightforward, but when talking about humans, labor, time, value addition, how can you create demand if the content or value is not valued?
If you're doing something that's not valued, I'd suggest you probably do something else. I don't know, but maybe I don't know. Maybe that's like an oversimplification of it. But like I don't know. For anyone who like builds in the space, it's kind of hard to deny that this happens where people just become extremely in demand during the bull market cycles. Like the price for smart contract development goes crazy. Like if someone's not familiar with it, I think they might have a hard time believing what people get paid to be just like a decent smart contract developer. And so these happen in market cycles. And so this is sort of a way to hedge heading into market cycles like that. But I do think there are a lot of people who it's very clear to observe that they're going to be more productive or in demand over time. Like one reason why I was motivated to create this type of system in the first place is because my background was with a lot of the earliest ICO projects. So like the project I worked with the most was Horde, but it was really part of the same IMAP family as I also worked with Golem Foundation for a little bit. For folks who remember Golem and Omisego, which is now OMG Network. And something that I saw, because I was sort of going to all these conferences and meeting people in the field and speaking at at events and stuff like that, is I was meeting these other individuals who were all of a sudden like not joining these ICO projects. And this was in the ICO fallout. It was, they still wanted to build in the space, but because there wasn't money left at these startups, they couldn't get hired, but they still wanted to build and they were highly motivated to do so. And they started building things on their own individually that were creating far more value than a lot of the ICOs that had taken place in the years prior. So like one person that I met was Austin Griffith, who like most people know in the space if they're building. It was like, when I first met him, it was completely obvious that he was going to become a rock star in terms of like building things that became extremely valuable. He produced, and we worked together in collaboration on the burner wallet that was released ETH Denver in, I think, 2018. I think it was 2018 or maybe 2019. And that burner wallet had no business model associated with it. He didn't make any money from it. And it was used at every conference for the next 2 years. But everybody asked him, hey, Austin, can you help like customize the burner wallet for like our event or their event? Like it just kept going on and on. And so there actually was all this demand for his time, attention, and labor. It was just going sort of uncaptured, really. And, you know, he'd get paid, I'm sure, in some small part, but he was totally obvious that he was going to become like more productive over time. I also met Hayden Adams before he built Uniswap. And again, like I met him at an event in New York, and he was just, he was in a debate with like this Bitcoin maxi about why Lightning Network was a terrible idea. But like the way that he was carrying himself was like, this guy clearly is so, it was obvious he was going to like do something significant. It just was. And so you meet people, and there are individuals who are like creating tremendous amounts of value. And I think that this really works well for them. And once they demonstrate how a system like this can be really good and self-sustaining, it'll be a lot more obvious for like smaller builders. But I think NFT artists are a really clear example where an NFT artist is bottlenecked by their ability to only drop, say, like one piece of art a week or something, right? So like, let's say Friday is the day that they drop their NFT. That means there's an entire week period where there's no economic engagement with the creator and their fans. People are just anticipating when this next NFT is going to come. And so this might be a way for them to hedge to gain more purchasing power for that NFT on Friday when the new NFT is released. And so even if they're not the ones who are able to purchase it and be the highest bidder, other people might be sort of buying into this token to gain leverage over buying their NFT the following week or something like that. And that holding the token over enough time might then allow somebody to be able to afford buying that person's NFT in a future week or something.
Nice.
I think, yeah. And the
Nice.
example with auditors, I think, is another clear one.
Yeah. So here you basically say that this should be treated as an investment into a person who is capable of producing an output or a deliverable within a given period of time. But would you recommend this this person to set up a meToken ecosystem at the beginning of the career, like before they even like grow, before they are big, before they're known, or is it something that they should do once they are established, or like doesn't it make any difference? What do you think about this? So what is the use case?
For sure. That I think it's worth doing it at the start of your career, or at least considering it. But I think the reason why it's worth doing it at the start of your career is because what it does is it allows for a resolution to take place in the agent principal problem of interpersonal relationships. Meaning what ends up happening to a lot of people at the start of their career is they do eventually find their niche, but when they find their niche, it's usually because they're working for somebody else who sort of like mentored them in some way. Like this very often is an employer. And what ends up happening is this person ends up growing to the point that they exceed the value that they're getting paid by this employer. And how do I say this? Like, you can imagine a scenario where like an entrepreneur or an employer, right, has a designer on their team, and this designer is so stinking good, like incredibly good. In fact, if anyone else knew how good this designer was, they would hire them for double what they're getting paid by this employer. The problem is the employer doesn't want to tell anybody about this designer, because if they tell anybody else about the designer, that other person is going to offer them more money. That designer is going to leave and go work elsewhere. Having this kind of a mechanism allows the employer to still have exposure to the growth of that individual even after they leave. And it doesn't have to be in such a concrete relationship as an employer-employee. It could be just like, you know, people that you freelance with on a regular basis. Like I said, we came out of Raid Guild, and you start meeting people in Raid Guild who are really, really good. and you meet other people who want to start up raids to like have their projects being built. If you have had a successful raid, you actually don't really have that much of an incentive to tell another person who wants their raid who in Raid Guild are the best people that you've worked with to have them work with them. Because as soon as they start working with them, all of a sudden it's going to be harder for you to work with them. And so I think this allows for there to be exposure for anybody to suddenly become an advocate for you to help share your work with other people. And that, in my opinion, is what blockchain is really good for, is you set some kind of a goal, you design incentives, and then those incentives are structured in a way to accelerate the rate at which that goal is achieved, right? So like at a very basic level, Bitcoin was created to create non-political money. Ethereum was created to deliver Turing complete smart contracts. Personal tokens should be designed to accelerate the rate of somebody's success. Like the incentive should be designed for that person to help them out. So that's why I would suggest doing it earlier rather than later.
Amazing. But if I invest in you, so like if I trust you to be like a good designer in the future, and I would need to buy the credits initially and then hold them and use them as, you know, like currency to buy your services, right? I mean, I could also sell them off at some point for profit, but if I want to work with you, I would need to invest very early, like the amount that I'm intending to spend for working with me, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Perfect. Thank you. Let's move over to the next question. We have quite a few. Can meToken also be considered as a personal vault? The issuer brings in value to the curve while buyers get in early and their early bought token grows as the issuer buys his own meToken to distribute or keep like a vault.
Yeah, right. I think there's kind of two parts to that. So the one is that in the initialization period, we also allow you to be the first liquidity provider. So you can buy your first set of meTokens, which is, by the way, like a non-risk decision. Aside from, of course, smart contract risk, there's always smart contract risk. In terms of economic risk for how the system's designed, if you're the first person to buy into your meToken, you can always burn all your meToken and just get your money back out. So you could almost certainly use that as like an investment in yourself. So that's one thing. As you earn your meTokens from your community of stakeholders, you can continue to hold it. Again, this is an investment in yourself. But at the same time, like we said, there's DeFi compatibility. So you can select a vault that is also going to earn yield on all the collateral in your vault. And you can structure this in any way you want. One way that could be very exciting to structure this is you could have a vault where you as the issuer passively earn all of the yield that comes from the total market cap of your meToken. So what's interesting about that is all of a sudden, like the interest you earn isn't only on your own savings, right? It's also on everybody else who's become a liquidity provider. And I think that's very fascinating, where all of a sudden it is other people who are acting, like you said, as a creditor to you, helping to provide you with this passive income even during like lull economic cycles. So yeah, I think there's something to there where it could be used as a personal savings account. And you could also set up a vault to be something like a balance or smart pool that readjusts. You know, you could say like 50% ETH or 50% DAI or something like that. Like it's incredibly fluid and dynamic in that regard.
Nice. Let me move on to the next question. Raluca asks, this is a fascinating concept. I've been recently thinking about allocating time based on how much others would stake to slots in one's calendar. I guess it's somewhat similar if we consider time is equal to money. Maybe in this case, one answer to Natshi would be that if someone is fully booked, whatever the equivalent in their personal tokens, then someone whose token is valued a bit less, but can still be invested in, people turn towards them. I'm wondering if this way of perceiving ourselves and others could eventually have some less happy social consequences.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I mean, the probably worst scenario, right, is this provides an opportunity to like short somebody, and that is very scary, potentially, right? I know this isn't exactly answering your question. I'm trying to think more specifically about valuing people's time and comparing one to another, but I think socially that kind of already happens, and I don't, you know, people refer to it as like, oh, it's really like dog eat dog world, or it's very cutthroat, like competitive and things like that. But I don't know that there's like anything that is worse from using this system in that regard. But what is for sure some kind of a real risk is if there's an opportunity to short somebody, there's an opportunity to you know, slander that person or, you know, character assassinate them. But by the same token, there's a bunch of stakeholders now that have an incentive to actually stand up for you and, say like, this person really isn't a bad person if there is slander going on or whatever. Currently, if like in cancel culture, it's very expensive to stand up for somebody because you only have your reputation to lose. You don't really have much to gain. So that's one way that the system helps. But, the absolute worst scenario is anytime you create a marketplace around an individual, what you're potentially doing as an unintended consequence is you're creating an assassination market, right? Like this is what everyone talked about with prediction markets when they were first created. You could easily create assassination markets, and potentially this could also be structured. This could also lead to something like that, which is quite dangerous. I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't, killing people is illegal. So like there is, like our legacy legal system in place that would disincentivize people from actually doing that. But, there's much more subtle ways of manipulation, things along those lines. I don't know what the answer is to that.
Sure.
But yeah, surely that's something to consider and be concerned about.
Yeah, one thing that I see happening here is that if, for example, like you would have people value your time, right? Like, so this would be a pricing mechanism by the community. So you wouldn't be able to say, I myself want to have this amount of money for an hour, because if no one is booking my calendar at this time, at this price, and I would need to go down with my price, right? So you would get into a community pricing mechanism instead of an individually based pricing mechanism for each agent in the economy, right?
Sure. Yeah. You could even set a floor and say, I won't book anything less than that, but you could always allow the auction mechanism to take over and go higher. But,
yeah, so how is it? But yeah, how is it actually like? So I was wondering about the utilities that you didn't mention to talk so much about them. So like this is only the issuance mechanism, right? That you described with the bonding curve. But how is it connected to the utility mechanism of people providing the services? So how do you how is this connected? How do you make sure that someone who is offering services gets to use the token in a particular way and that they are designed and so on?
Yeah, I think there's like streamlined tools. There's two different categories of. There's one that's like any service or good that's over the counter would need to be paid in a similar way as like if you're hiring somebody on Upwork or Fiverr or something like that, right? Like you have to you might pay them once a week for an ongoing job or whatever, or you might even call upon some escrow service to sort of act as an arbiter of a dispute or something. But then there are like more streamlined types of services like booking time on someone's calendar, where it could just be like a token gated event, right? It doesn't have to be like a paid event necessarily. If it's token gated, then like I showed with the demo of Calendith, you have access to Google's API to book time on their calendar if you hold a certain number of tokens. With XMTP, it's similar. If they're using meTokens inbox, that they're filtering anyone who messages them and is a holder of their meToken to the top of their inbox. So it's about building tools where that's sort of just built into it.
This is basically left to the project or left to the particular use case, right? You don't take care of this so much, right? Like you're just providing the primary market and a bonding curve and the issuance mechanism, and then you say you can integrate this token in your application if you build something for it, but you don't necessarily provide those applications with your market, right?
Yeah, the only one that we implement now is XMTP is natively built into the meTokens platform, and then Calendith will be released sometime early in the new year. And those two will be integrated in meTokens directly. Otherwise, we're going to have like a list of apps where you can go through and kind of like cobble your utilities together on your own. But like we'd like to have a streamlined way of doing this. So something that we've envisioned is something like an app store where you can like install like different applications or utilities into your meToken. And so then you would end up creating something like a token OS where now like everybody knows when they go to your profile what applications you've installed and like what you have a history of using at the smart contract level, stuff like that. So
exactly, because what I see happening here is if you have this meToken now issued, you could say someone is booking a slot in your calendar with a meToken, or someone is auctioning, like a group of people are auctioning for a particular time in your calendar or for a particular project that they want to execute with you, right? And all of those mechanisms, the auction mechanism, the booking mechanism, the staking mechanism, those are features that need to be built, provided, and integrated into those applications so that the token can be used appropriately, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. Yeah, let me move over to the next question. Okay, some comments. Nice talk, great community, some compliments. This is nice to share. So does the curve shape change according to an oracle or according to a predefined change to be implemented at a certain time, or can be either? So I think that this is a question around the dynamic aspects of the bonding curve that you've mentioned. And here we have Karim asking about how this is actually taking place. So how are those dynamics integrated?
Yeah, okay, great question. So the way that we have it set up is in issuance strategy, we just abbreviate and we call it a hub. So when you create a meToken, you subscribe to a hub. And this includes what the shape of the curve is, the delta between the floor and the ceiling, and the collateral type, and like any sort of vault details about if the collateral gets lent out on Aave or Yearn or whatever, right? So each hub has an owner. The owner is in charge of setting, like being able to change any of the parameters over time. At a protocol level, however, there is the warm-up period and the duration of an update is universal to everybody, meaning that, like, you know, an owner of a hub couldn't update the meToken or like the hub issuance strategy like immediately overnight if they wanted to. So like the entire protocol has to agree to what the duration is, and that's just for, you know, security purposes. But the way it could work is that owner could be anybody. So for example, like I, as an issuer, could create my own hub, and therefore I entirely own the issuance parameters. I can change those within the constraints of the warm-up period and the duration of an update cycle. You could also allow a hub to be owned by a DAO. So it could be like a group of issuers who come together and they determine collectively like what makes the most sense. And then what that means is for a lot of people who don't want to think about crypto economics, they can just subscribe to a group of people who they trust and say, like, you know, this group of people, there's, it's a multi-sig, let's say, there's like 10 of them. I generally trust that they're going to make the best decision, so I'm just going to subscribe to their hub. If at any time they decide to update their hub to something that you don't like during that warm-up period, you can resubscribe to another hub that could be like the current hub settings that you're at. Like, so you keep your same parameter set. For example, the hub, I mean, it could be owned in any way that you really want and conceive of. Like I said in the presentation, you could imagine a scenario where, like, if you create your own hub, you could be set as a partial owner, and then you could allow anyone who holds your token to be a partial owner. So maybe you know, at least like 10% of the tokens need to vote in order to change the parameters. And you own like 50% of the voting power or 25% of the voting power or whatever, I don't know. But you can kind of like modularize that at the most basic level and sort of create an agreement with your token holders if you want, or you can subscribe to other people and sort of delegate elsewhere. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
So you basically disentangle the logical implementation from the technical implementation, right? So there is like a way how to technically solve it. You have this hub, and you can basically make changes in the parameter sets feasible. And the way how you have the governance over this hub, this is something that is totally up to you. So you can choose how you want to set this up. And then the follow-up question from my side would be: do you have any empirical evidence on like how this, like what's going on here? Like, do you have any research? Do you have any numerical results or like past data that shows which strategies have been successful and which less so?
I mean, what we do have is like a history of people who are using their meToken and showing that like other people get more excited about folks who are more productive. So like Skipper Gems is an NFT artist. He probably has like the highest transaction volume on his token in terms of like frequency of trading. Same with Carter. He also continues to trade his time for smart contract development. And And Skipper was also like the most successful person out of the original proof of concept of Stake on Me as well. Something that he did is he was providing like special privileges to his token holders, especially, at that time, Rarible was doing liquidity mining for their Rari governance token to NFT artists who sold on their platform. So he was selling exclusively on Rarible. He was earning Rari, and he was taking Rari and using it as like creating dividends and sending them to people who were holding his meToken, and that was extremely successful. Jake Bruckman is a VC at CoinFund. There used to be a platform called Microsponsors, which was effectively like an auction house for time on your calendar. And he was also very successful in getting a lot of stakeholders who were interested in booking time on his calendar. That's really the data that we have in terms of like running simulations, CAD stuff. We haven't, we haven't run anything like that other than like, just running our own numbers and like theorizing and stuff like that, more manually than anything. But yeah, if anyone wants to run simulations and create a meToken, I would definitely buy some of your token, as like that's a unique skill set to be able to run those simulations. So feel free to reach out. I would like to work with you. But
interesting. Yeah, we can talk about this. Let me follow up with another question. Which chains are you working for? EVMs, Cosmos? But I think this is answered by Jay. Ethereum, right?
Yeah, it's on Ethereum mainnet as opposed to a layer 2. The reason for that is because it's DeFi interoperable. So we want to make sure we're taking advantage of the capital efficiencies of mainnet, where we can easily gain the highest yield. Like, I think that's where that's just where the highest yield is mainnet. So
yeah. Cool. Then we have some questions about the white paper documentations. Do you have anything public?
Yeah, I have the original white paper that I wrote in 2019. There is some stuff that's excluded from that, such as like the hub design. That's basically designed as like, back then everyone deployed all the contracts themselves. They deployed the AMM themselves, they deployed the vault themselves, the ERC20. So that's kind of how the white paper is written, but all that documentation is at meTokens.com. You click the docs on the left, and somewhere in our Notion site is actually the original white papers, but there is more documentation in there that we're continuing to build out. It's still kind of rough around the edges, but it should provide anyone who's interested with far more context. If there's not something that you want to see in there, let us know. I'm pretty quick to go ahead and add more documentation, and appreciate any feedback. So yeah, thank you.
Cool. Next question by Zaremba. How close is the meToken to the original idea of money backed by labor and money redeemable for goods and services? Is it not the case that the type of pressures, forces that the meToken operates create a disconnect between the prices of the token and the goods and services that the issuer can provide? For example, the pricing of bonding curve is unlikely to be connected to the value of goods and services for many types of goods and services. Would you say that the meToken is supposed to create network effects for the goods and services that the issuer offers?
I think that's a great way to phrase it. Yeah. Everyone thinks about personal tokens for a long time because everyone was saying like 1 token is 1 hour of time, or 1 token is 1 calendar booking. They were thinking about like the price of a good or service being denominated in that token. I think more accurately, it's going to be that the token is a proxy for the underlying collateral, and you're still going to price your goods and services in like US dollars, or whatever your local currency is. So you'll ask for $100 worth of your meToken, for example. So yeah, I would say more than anything, meTokens are an instrument for creating network effects around an individual. And the utility and value of their time, attention, and labor.
Cool. Then there's a question about you sending the slides of the recording, like distributing for, like, if you're interested in sharing the slides, there's people in the audience who would be happy to have them. Then, okay, we are uploading the recording to our YouTube channel. Amazing talk, big props to the meTokens team, feeling very early to this movement, and we'll be reading more about EC Regal. This is a comment as well. Instead of selling tax delta between buying and selling curves being re-injected into the curve to provide more backing for the circulating tokens, can we direct this delta tax to a different address?
That's not how it's structured in the smart contracts now, but I mean, in theory, you could write a very gas inefficient vault that does this. But I think if that's what you're interested in doing, it really is like a different economic system or like incentive structure. Yeah, I'm generally like a little bit skeptical of it, because I think then it doesn't create an asymmetry in the market that helps you sustain your own meToken. And actually what it does is it creates an incentive for you to not deliver because you want your token to crash, because then you don't have to do anything and you just start earning money when people sell. So I am skeptical of that as a design system, and would encourage people not to create super Frankenstein type vaults that do that. But in theory, you definitely could. I just I would warn people, caution people about doing that before. Yeah.
Yeah, but so what you're saying, you should keep the general structure, but you can add like maybe a side vault, like for like a small percentage of whatever that is going to a community fund or like insurance mechanism or whatever, right? So like the general structure should be the same, but you could navigate some parts of your money to a different purpose, right?
Exactly. And what I would encourage everyone to do when they're thinking about that is really think that what you're doing is you're creating an agreement with your stakeholders, right? Like you're not just like creating this structure in a vacuum. Like you are going to have people who you're negotiating with when you're proposing this and saying, this is how, if you want to engage with me economically in this way, these are going to be the rules. Do you think someone else will accept these rules? So just be mindful of that. But yeah, you could do that.
Nice. Is there any recommended book from Regal to read more about this?
Yeah, I would say the one that is The New Approach to Freedom. You can get from Abe Books. There's usually about 4 or 5 copies available, and they're somewhere in the range of like $25 to $35. I own 2 copies just in case they start. Yeah, I don't know. I collect rare books anyway, so for me that's like a cool thing. But that's like for sure the most lucid book, like writing on this subject that's out there, hands down. You can also, I think the website is like newapproachtofreedom.org or .net. If you just Google New Approach to Freedom or EC Regal, there's 2 people out there who've created websites where you can get the entire collection of essays as a PDF. So it's free. Yeah, I would read that. That's definitely the quickest go-to. There's also a documentary that a gentleman made, like, I don't know how old it is, like maybe 15, 20 years old or something like that. And it's like this, it's sort of corny cartoon. It's called Money is Debt Part 1, 2, and 3. In total, it's like 4.5 hours. And in that, he talks about self-issued credit. That's he discusses EC Regal in that. And that's like a fun animated way to get exposed to more of these ideas. And so I can link to that and follow up with the resources there, maybe later along with the slides, so everyone can access them.
Nice. Another comment, it's not so much a question, it's a comment. I'd love to help thinking about this wider, as this is not only for devs and not only for developed countries. Many other societies like Latin American countries may get value of no Web3 related jobs having a personal token to be paid, avoiding counter inflation and devaluation. Example, doctors, professionals in other fields, etc. Thinking in crypto massive adoption, we need to think out of the box, out of devs' lives only, in my honest opinion. So this is a comment, but this leads me to a question from my side. Like, okay, we know that it's technically feasible what you do, but like, what are the legal implications? Like, and how am I allowed to issue an own currency? Because like this is not always not always supported by governments, right?
Yeah, for sure. But what I'll say about this is that we, I don't want to put the individual's name out there, but we worked with somebody who was on the SEC investigation as an expert witness on the prosecution side against EOS. I don't know what that was, like 4 years ago, 3 years ago. And so he worked with all the prosecuting attorneys, and we shared like desk space together, basically. He was very excited about the meTokens design, and so he brought this to the lead prosecutor, one of the lead prosecutors on the EOS investigation, and her feedback on it was she felt that this was a very appropriate token design, at least in the US, is what I can speak to. I'm a US citizen, so that's the jurisdiction I'm most familiar with. And I wouldn't take this as like perfect legal advice, but what she shared is the reason why this is a much better system and a very appropriate one if a person were to issue their own token is because when a person creates their own token with this system, they're not receiving all the money up front. Like they're not receiving money for having done nothing and then creating a token that is only valued by a promise to deliver value in the future. What they're doing in this case is that the token is collateralized by something, and the issuer only receives money when they engage in an economic exchange. So when they provide some good or service, they get paid for it. That's the only time that the issuer gets money in the system. And so she felt, because of that, that it was a very appropriate token design. Of course, like, yeah, I think issuing any type of a token, even an NFT, right, is a type of personal token. You do have to have a certain level of risk tolerance to engage in that market behavior in the first place. Yeah, that's about what I can say to that. If anyone actually, maybe he doesn't want to be put on blast here, but Jay Frank, our community manager, actually is an attorney himself. And so if anyone wants to discuss a little bit more of the legal implications, he does like having those conversations. Of course, I don't think he would give it as like, you know, as perfect legal advice, but the conversations are interesting, and he does have a wide breadth of knowledge. So
nice. Let's move over to the next question, which is more straightforward. How can you prevent price manipulations on meTokens?
Yeah, so there's sort of two ways that price manipulation can happen. There's pump and dumps, right? So like other people in the market could buy up your token, and when more people buy in, they sell it. But I think the stabilization fee is what really helps prevent that. Like, that is a very unique feature of the automated discount market maker, is that it accounts for speculators coming in and trying to abuse a low liquidity market. And it does so at the benefit of those who are like the true believers in the market. So I think in that regard, it's very self-regulating for anybody who's an external stakeholder. However, there is a slightly more nefarious opportunity that an issuer could, in theory, flash loan, buy a bunch of their own tokens and resell them back to the market to drain that. We call it a balance locked. Everything that goes into sort of that stability fee, that overflow, you could, in theory, as an issuer, just buy and burn over and over and over in the same transactions to eventually drain not all, but most of the funds in that pool. What I would say to that is it's really an attack that you can only carry out once. Once you do that, no one's going to trust you again. You're really burning a serious amount of reputation by doing that. But two, we talked about having smart contract wallets. You could go ahead and program into that flash loan attacks couldn't take place, or like you can only burn once a day or something like that. Like you could use that as a proxy for you know, further enforcing the agreement that you have with your stakeholders that you're not going to do this, and you can verify it on chain with the smart contract rules for how you choose and when you choose to burn your own token. So that's one way to do it. Of course, you could also just let people know and say like, hey, sometimes I'm going to need money and I might do this from time to time. And that might also be part of your agreement with your stakeholders. I would say those are the two attacks. One is very self-regulating. The other one has maybe like 3 different outcomes, but one of which can be self-regulating. So that way that problem becomes a non-issue with the smart contract.
But this is interesting because there's a follow-up question here. Can you have more than one meTokens? If a person has maybe 2 types of work, or like wants to conduct this attack and then like issue a second token another time, and or let's say they are established developer and an early stage artist only starting to sell the art, what would be the best meToken strategy in such a case? So would you rather say let's have 2 tokens, or would you say let's have 1 token and like 2 different types of economic utilities, 2 types of economic services?
That's what I would do. I would do 1 token with 2 different types of economic services and utility. With the only exception being, and the way that our contracts are written is you can only have 1 meToken per address. So like 1 address couldn't own 2 different meTokens. But the only exception that I would say to having 2 different meTokens is there are a lot of people in the space that operate anonymously or pseudonymously along in parallel with their primary identity. And so if you're doing that, then I would say meTokens is I would create 2 meTokens for having 2 different identities in that case, one that is anonymous and one that's pseudonymous. You could imagine though that if, for example, you worked at a known project for a number of years, you have a strong reputation, maybe you're a smart contract developer and you deployed those contracts, and all of a sudden, you know, you leave that organization, you have this idea, and you want to run it anonymously for a little while or pseudonymously, you bootstrap this new identity. Something that you could do is, although it's a separate meToken altogether, you could use zero knowledge proofs to prove that you have another identity that deployed a smart contract that currently has $500 million in TVL, right? Like you could create that signature using the wallet of your real identity to prove that you deployed this contract, and then you could ship that to your pseudonymous identity to show like you're not just a nobody, you actually have some serious reputation. That's the only time that I would say like have two different identities, but you're gonna have two different wallets for that anyway. But I would not take one identity where you have two different utilities and have two different meTokens for each utility. The meTokens protocol is generalized enough for you to capture both value.
Nice. And there's another question related to the same topic of like collaboration with different people. Would it make sense to have co-tokens, example for collaborators or members of an organization on a project so that they can get paid according to the same strategy?
100%. So I just gave a presentation with DAO House last week for DAO Summer, or maybe it was the week before, but I can also link to this presentation for anyone who wants to watch it. It was recorded and uploaded to Twitch. I think it'll be on YouTube at some point. There's a couple points with audio breaks, so I can ship you guys the presentation of that so you can see the slides as well. What you can do with meTokens is you can combine it with Moloch as well. You can combine it with any sort of DAO structure, but DAO House is the factory for shipping Moloch v3 and all the other versions as well, but now it does v3. And the topic of that presentation is what are all the different ways that you can combine a DAO with a meToken. One of those ways is that the DAO itself could have its own meToken. So I was talking about Raid Guild before. You could imagine that Raid Guild could have its own meToken, meaning anyone who's part of Raid Guild, and maybe they have to get whitelisted to be a member of Raid Guild, now have the special permissions to earn that that asymmetric additional value of the Raid Guild meToken for themselves when they ship a raid. And then everybody who's external to Raid Guild can now speculate on the future demand for Raid Guild as an organization. So they can buy like future credits to purchase labor from Raid Guild, which is kind of like how the raids operate to this day, is that what you do is you ship a certain raid. It's like, say, an 8-week period. You ship something, you do some market research, you engage in users, and then you come up with like, okay, this needs to be the next raid that gets shipped for this product to grow further. And so buying some meTokens is a way to lock in the future value, the current value in the future, to continue to hire them for more raids. So that's one way it could be done. You could also imagine like a basket of people, like a group of people take their meTokens, they use it as collateral in a DAO, and then they issue shares. Like Moloch allows you to do this, where you submit tribute. Everyone's tribute could be their own meToken, like $10,000 with their own meToken, and then the share token of that DAO becomes effectively like a basket for exposure to, say, like 10 different builders. There's some interesting economic incentives that come out of that, where everybody who is part of that DAO now has an incentive to help each other become equally successful. Because if anyone rage quits, they end up taking more of the successful person's token than anyone else. So the successful person wants to make sure everyone else also succeeds. That way, if anyone rage quits, they don't lose a larger share of their own tokens to everybody else. So there's all these different design mechanisms that can be done there. But yeah, you could definitely have like collective meTokens that aren't just for one person, to answer the question.
Amazing. Christopher, this brings us to the end of the questions we had in the chat. So, I mean, we've spent almost 2 hours of our time today with the presentation of your project and also with the discussions around them. So it was very great and very insightful. Thank you very much for sharing and answering all the questions in so much detail. I will think of a way how we could continue the conversation. So maybe like async, or maybe there are some follow-up ideas that we could discuss. I'm sure that our community and also myself would be very interested in this. But aside from this, I think for today, this is a perfect place to say thank you very much and amazing presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate all the outstanding engaged questions you guys asked. Thank you for hosting. Myself and Jay is also on the call. Yeah, really appreciate you guys giving us this opportunity to share everything. So thank you again.
Cool. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. Take care.